Folks, this is a SAM webinar on T32s. Hopefully you're in the right webinar. I'm Clifton Callaway, and I'm doing this with Jeremy Brown, who you see in another panel. We're admitting people and still a couple of people in the waiting room coming in, so we're giving it a moment. I don't know, Bill, if you need to make any introduction from SAM, or if you'd like Jeremy and I to plunge right ahead.
No, you can plunge right ahead whenever you're ready.
We've got two parts. I'm an investigator at University of Pittsburgh, and Jeremy is our ombudsman at NINDS from NIH. And Jeremy, I think you wanted to begin with some programmatic overview.
Yes.
And I'll chime in with some personal experience with a T32. And then hopefully we'll have time for discussion.
Terrific. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to share my desktop with you. Okay. Cliff, do we see this? Understanding the T32, excuse me.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so as Cliff said, I would like to just spend a few minutes with you talking about the T32s across the NIH as a whole. Cliff has a great deal of experience with the T32s as from a particular institute. And everybody should remember that the NIH is the National Institutes, plural, of health, meaning there's more than one institute. So if you think you know how to get a T32 from one institute, you do not necessarily know how to get it from a second. So each institute is different, and that's why I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving you sort of the bird's eye view. Okay, so what are these T32s? You know, there's many dozens of different grant types at the NIH. The T32 from their website is otherwise known as an Institutional National Research Service Award, and the goal of this T32 is to enable institutions to pick individuals. So it's the institution who's picking the individual, not the NIH. But the NIH chooses the institution that will do the picking, and then get them ready for pre-doctoral or postdoctoral research. The vast majority of T32s are to sort of PhD type folks, but there are some, an increasing number, you'll hear this from Cliff, which are based on the clinician. Now, there is a general, or what's called a parent announcement, that you can see here. This is the general announcement informing the community that the centers, which you can see up here, which you can see up here on the top sort of right-hand side, that these are the centers that participate in this Institutional Training Parent Award. And if you click on this link here, you're now seeing the live web page of that, and you'll see here that when I click on, let's say, the National Institute on Aging, who are participating in this T32, it brings you out to their specific website. But within that website, you will find things that apply to that institute in a way that may not apply to others. So once you've figured out which you think is the correct institute for your research, you have to read very carefully the T32 for that institute and whether it has any changes, whether its criteria are different. But the general announcement is this one here, the Ruth Kirstein Institutional Award. Now, the goal of this award, in other words, the general award we just mentioned, is to develop a diverse pool of scientists that can work, and here you see, to address the nation's biomedical, behavioral, and clinical research needs. So clinical research is definitely part of this. And the money that a T32 fellow might get includes stipends, tuition, training-related expenses, and so on. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to have if you are a recipient on one of these awards. And remember, we're not talking about the institute now, we're talking about the recipient. some of the things from that web page that I showed you a moment ago are here. You have the goal of the program are laid out, and it says you are expected to help trainees develop, and then a long list: strong foundation in scientific reasoning, experimental methods. You're expected to develop their individual development plans and to identify areas of their personal growth. You're expected to develop their skills in engaging their particular area of science, including, I like this one, including networking, presentation, and publication skills. So it's really an opportunity to take someone at the sort of junior attending level, I think, and bring them up in several notches through this T32. Now, as I told you, each institute may do things a little bit differently. Not every institute has a different T32 funding opportunity announcement than the one I just showed you, the Kirstein announcement. But NINDS, the National Institute for Neurological Disorders and Stroke, which is particularly friendly to and accommodating of emergency medicine, has its own T32 rules. And so, although it's called a T32, it has its own sort of specific goals. So if you were to develop one, in this example from NINDS, you would refer to this separate T32 and not necessarily, and not only the general one. The T32 at NINDS is to prepare postdocs, as they call them, but again, you can be clinicians, focused on a specific theme within the area of either fundamental knowledge about the brain, because that's what NINDS does, or, as you can see here, it clearly says that you can have clinical or translational research. And the program, when it competes for funding, the program, not the individual mentees who are chosen by the program, but the program has to demonstrate a number of qualities and expertise in areas that would allow it to really blossom in this way and provide training. And Cliff will go into that in a little bit more detail. This again is the funding opportunity announcement for NINDS. My point here of showing you this is that there are specific needs, and I know you've heard me say this once, and I'm going to say it several more times. Each institute has its specific needs. Read them very carefully. For example, the NINDS funding opportunity does not allow trainees to lead an independent clinical trial, but does allow them to lead or obtain research experience in a clinical trial led by a mentor or co-mentor. That seems reasonable, but again, it's just something that you need to be aware of. I'd like to show you another example of where these things can be very dependent on the institute. This is the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH. It has its own T32, and you should look it up carefully and see what it is that they're interested in. Now, I want to draw your attention to, the last paragraph. This is true of any institute that which you are thinking of getting a T32, or indeed any grant from. Nobody should be writing to the NIH or submitting a grant to the NIH without having spoken first to a program staff. So the last paragraph on this page from the NIMH says that training PDs are strongly encouraged to contact institute program staff well in advance of the receipt deadline to discuss their institute's application plans. And it takes us here, as you can see, the next thing it says, we have an informal webinar on exactly how to do a T32 application for NIMH. And here is that webinar where you to click on that link. It's actually a little bit over almost an hour and 20 minutes long, but it is a very complete webinar on how you might think about doing a T32 for the National Institute of Mental Health in, let's say, something like emergency psychiatry, right? You might want to, that might be where you're going to specialize your training. So they would be the natural partner for you. Which emergency departments actually have a T32? The answer is not many. Cliff, who is here with me, he will be talking about his experience with getting a T32. There is one from, let's look at some other ones. And then, as I could see here, the bottom two actually are false positives. These are hits that I got when I typed in to this publicly available website, the NIH reporter, when I typed in T32 in emergency medicine. I think it's because the PIs listed here must have mistakenly entered their specialty as emergency medicine. So we really have, to the best of my knowledge, two, possibly a third one, that that are led by emergency medicine physicians, but that doesn't mean these are the only ones that emergency medicine physicians could apply to. There could be a T32 run out, for example, of an anesthesiology department, critical care, that might be open to other people. So just to show you, this is one of the ones that we have. It's from Michigan. Patrick Carter is the PI, and it's to develop a very specific cadre of research scholars with 2 years training to understand the public health disease of gun violence and how it affects pediatric mortality. So that's one example of a T32. This comes out of the National Institute for Child Health. The one we're going to hear about in a moment, and I'm not going to spend more time on this because Cliff's going to walk us through it. Another one is Cliff from Pittsburgh. As you can see, it's called the Emergency Medicine Research Training Program, which sounds very enticing. It sounds like, oh, that's great. That means we can do pretty much anything under the purview that comes into the emergency department. It's not quite true, as you'll hear. This is supported by the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and therefore they know that it will focus on topics within the mission of NHLBI. So you have to stay within the mission of the institute that is giving you funding. Lynn Richardson from Mount Sinai has had I think she was among the first people to get one of these grants, a T32. I believe it has ended. That should be 2021, not 2012. My apologies. And she was training people in the cardiovascular side of emergency medicine, because again, that was funded by the Heart, Lung, and Blood people. So I think that went from 2016 to 2021, I believe. That is it from me. So there is the sort of the large overview of what is available to you at NIH in general. Now we'll hand it over to Cliff for a more detailed focus on the specifics of a program, and then once Cliff is done, we'll certainly have some time for questions. So if you'd like to write them down for now, that would be great. Over to you, Cliff. Thank you.
Is that displaying okay? Can you see slides?
Yep, perfect.
Great. I wanted to follow that general overview with my specific experience applying for and us having as an institution for 5 years a T32. And I thought the way to go was to break it up into the motivation for doing it, what the application process looks like, what running the T32 experience is like, and then what I found when we renewed it last year. Jeremy pointed this out, and I think it's really critical that we don't forget that NIH is using these mechanisms to train investigators. They are not focused on a specialty or clinicians or clinician educators. You are putting people on their career path to become established investigators, which an NIH metric of that would be they're going on to get NIH grants and be funded by NIH to do biomedical research. We have experience in the past with K-12s, and I think many of us on the call know about K grants or K-23s, individual K awards. And we participated in one of the K-12 programs for emergency care funded by Heart, Lung, Blood a few years ago. And, one of our observations was that folks finishing residency were not sufficiently differentiated in their career goals yet to be moving into K awards. And people who had developed research focuses for the few years after residency were now pretty well entrenched in their universities and might be unlikely to pick up their household and move from one city to Pittsburgh to participate in an institutional K program. And it would be good if we could kind of span that gap between residency and early career, where someone is keenly interested in research, but is shaping what their research agenda is going to be. And the T32 is exactly aimed at that career stage. It's the postdoctoral phase, and in a clinical specialty, often that's the post-residency phase, where you're gaining research skills and defining what research is going to be on your T-shirt. We envisioned our T32 as really targeting folks at the fellowship level as postdoctoral scholars. We also included, and this is not a required thing, some pre-doctoral slots, because we thought some experience either in medical school or very early pre-residency could help people decide on an investigative career and make them more likely to pursue a fellowship after residency. But the real focus in center of mass for the T32 is on that postdoctoral training, which for us is research fellowships, largely after residency training. Good things about doing the T32 is it gets money for your fellows. There's salary support. The salary support is tied to the NIH scale for postdoctoral trainees. If it's post-residency, they're going to be PGY 4, 5, or 6, might be 7 or more. And you can see the dollars for stipend. So it's not life-changing dollars, but it's dollars you didn't have before to support somebody's research training. There's also definitely prestige. So fellows who are in a NIH funded slot statistically and historically have greater chance of going on to subsequent NIH funding. And it's, it's really a desirable thing. There's some other benefits, was mentioned earlier. There's tuition and training related costs and some travel. And you can see, again, it's not huge money and it's all for the scholar. So it's training related costs might be used to purchase their health insurance, or they might use it for something that's going to augment their research training. I had a fellow who used it to purchase a data set that required a fee for access to the data set when they were doing some health services research, as an example. But it's not enough money that they're going to do a large clinical project. And so they're going to need matching support from the institution to do the bulk of the research. So it's not a research grant. The overhead costs, the indirect costs are 8%. So like other training grants, it's a reduced F&A rate compared to an R01 or a full F&A grant. So the bad is, it's real work. So you're going to get an institutional training grant. It's going to provide these benefits for your fellows, but you're going to do some real administrative work, tracking their progress, doing progress reports. And that's only paid for in that 8% F&A costs. There's not a line item for the program director or for the program director's administrator to run the program. There's also some restrictions. Fellows have to be training grant eligible, and they have to devote full effort to the training. Some institutions, mine included, won't allow somebody on a T32 or an NRSA training grant to hold a faculty appointment, We don't consider them staff, but they're considered a postdoctoral trainee with no guarantee of long-term faculty appointment. So that becomes a bit of a understanding between the department chair and the fellow. Are they on a track where they are likely to be able to stay? Or is there going to be a slot for them when they finish their fellowship? And it might be a dissatisfier for some people that their appointment is postdoctoral scholar, not assistant professor or instructor or whatever the equivalent is at your institution. That's an institutional rule. Your institution may appoint them as a assistant professor and move on. Full-time is defined as the person is devoting all of their effort to their academic development, but it acknowledges in the fine print that clinicians may spend some time in clinical duties, and it gives a guideline which is very consistent with SAM's guidelines for research fellowships. 25% of their time, or 10 hours per week, something like that, can be devoted to clinical employment. At my shop, the two institutions are distinct, the practice plan and the university. So our fellows are appointed 100% at the university, and they essentially are moonlighting for the health system to do their clinical work and keep up their clinical skills. You have to monitor it and make sure that it's not encroaching on their academic development. So that's a dance that you all probably have experience doing. Training grant eligible is somewhat restrictive, and it means having a green card, essentially, permanent residence at the time of appointment. So people who are here on a J1 visa are not going to be eligible for the T32 support. And this becomes an issue for some folks. And I think we've had some really excellent applicants and candidates who I was unable to provide T32 or offer T32 support for because their visa issues was still in progress and they didn't have permanent residence yet. So let's talk about applying. The most infamous part of T32s is tables, lots of tables. And the tables are there for you to provide data to answer all of the questions you see there in that left column. What's the need for this program? Do you have applicants that are going to be in the program? Or do you have mentors who can train them? And then your text and prose are going to talk to you, or going to talk about your specific plans and your evaluation. In terms of establishing the need, you need to look at what else is at your institution and why NIH, whatever institute you're working with, would want to put another bolus of money in your institution for training. Aren't they already doing that with other programs, and what are you going to bring that's different? If I put in T32 into Reporter in University of Pittsburgh, turns out there are 45 T32s at my university. Until I had to apply, I was not aware of all of these, and some of them were people I worked with clinically or saw as collaborators all the time, and I didn't realize that they were also directing the T32 for their department, or that their fellows were part of a T32. This is good and bad. It is bad because you need to come up with something different and prove that your emergency medicine trainees would not be just fine being enrolled in the cardiac engineering T32 program that Heart, Lung, Blood offers, or that your emergency psychiatry interested person is not perfectly served by the Department of Psychiatry's T32 in acute mental health. So the good side of that is, well, here's a bunch of people who know exactly what needs to go into a T32 from your institution, and you probably know them, and you can get hold of their grants, you can use their experience, you can put them on your mentoring team and copy a lot of successful strategies that they've worked out. I discovered one T32 had been at our institution for probably 40 years now, had been handed off to several program directors over time. And so they had huge institutional experience and had really ramped up what they do for their applicants, and are a great resource to make your application better. So answer those questions. What will be different about your program? What's it going to teach that the other programs at your institution are not doing? For us, emergency care research had unique features, exception from informed consent, 24/7 recruiting, certain medical problems that didn't fit well into the other programs. And I needed to spell that out in the application. And I already mentioned that those other program directors are awesome. I also became a mentor on those other T32s to get experience. So what goes around comes around, and that can be a quid pro quo to help on their T32s in order to get help on yours. It'll also give you insights into some of the data you'll need to collect. One is you need to prove that people are going to apply to your T32 and that you'll have an adequate pool of applicants from which you can draw qualified scholars. Having an established research fellowship is a real plus because you know everybody who's applied to your research fellowship or who's been in your research fellowship for the past number of years. The tables change periodically. For the first application we did, we had to go back 10 years and find out what these numbers of applicants and so forth were for the past 10 years. And I discovered I didn't have maybe good counts of the total applicants from back in 2010 or 2009. And that's something that if you're thinking of doing this in the next few years, start collecting the data now. When I did the renewal, we had to document the past 5 years. And so I, was tuned into this and I was keeping much closer track of every email I got and every CV I got from somebody who was interested in a research fellowship. Some were not training grant eligible, some were not good matches, some had no interest in coming to Pittsburgh, but they were contacts that represented people that we potentially could recruit. And you can see the categories there. How many did you see? How many were eligible? How many did you actually matriculate into your program? In terms of mentors, you also are going to need to load up with people with diverse research skills. And you're going to need to document not just that they're great researchers, but that they're great mentors and trainers of researchers. So, your typical biosketch, you may be highlighting your research prowess and how many clinical trials you've been involved with and so forth. But this flips it. This is not a research grant. Here, you're going to need your mentors to document, well, how many master's committees have you been on? How many PhD committees have you been on? What's your experience with being a mentor on people's K grants? How many graduate students or residents are now in investigative careers that you helped participate in their training during the course of your career? So it's really, for those of us who wear mostly a clinical investigator hat, pivoting to be an educator investigator. And the documentation needs to be like that. There's naturally a table that goes with it. And you're going to need to get that kind of information from all of your potential mentors. And we're going to wind up asking them, how many predoctoral scholars have you trained? How many postdoctoral scholars have you trained? How many are there of those people still in research or related careers? So not just, I trained 15 pulmonary fellows over the past 10 years, but how many of those pulmonary fellows are currently right now doing clinical investigation in their current jobs? Naturally, people who are in T32 programs already know to be collecting that kind of information, and they have it much more at their fingertips than if you go to your favorite scientific collaborator in another department who hasn't done a table like this. They're going to have to scratch their head, look at their CV, hit Google, try to figure out where some of those trainees are now. And it can be a little bit of a treasure hunt to fill these tables out. So infamous is getting this data, and that our institution is actually trying to centralize the effort and create some centralized dashboards that are common to those 45 T32s, so that we can more rigorously fill these tables out with apples to apples comparisons. This also highlights that you need more than a few mentors, and half the people on this page are not in emergency medicine. So I see a neurosurgeon, a trauma surgeon, a pulmonologist, and a pediatric emergency physician outside of my department here on this page. And, that reflects the fact that your mentoring pool needs to have broad skills that are going to be available for any scholar who might come along, because you don't know who your scholars are yet. And maybe they'll be interested in health services research, and that's not your thing. Maybe the next one will be interested in clinical trials, and that is your thing. Your mentor list needs to have enough diversity in skill sets to accommodate that. You also need to be kind of senior, because an assistant professor or someone who's themselves early career is not going to have a lot of postdoctorates completed training at that point. You don't want to weight this table down with too many people who don't have a training record. You're also going to need to know how much research support they have. Because remember the part where the scholar gets about $12,000 for training related expenses? The review committee is going to consider, well, they're not going to get a lot of research experience with $12,000. Do the mentors have enough research funding that's available for a scholar to come and have experiences? So having well-funded folks with training records is the ideal mentor pool. And there's actually at the bottom of this table a place where you add it all up and say, there's $12 million available, or however many millions of dollars available for scholars to support their research. You need a specific training plan. Heart, lung, blood, in contrast to the one we saw on Jeremy's slide, they expected a 2 or 3 year commitment from fellows. They actually specifically said that 1 year is not enough. So they weren't interested in any scholars with only a 1 year commitment. They expected master's level formal didactic training. Somebody already has an MPH or a master's degree, they don't have to get another one, but they need to do some kind of formal didactics that's in the same range as a master's degree. They should have milestones, and some of their activities should be professional development, not just pure research, but are we moving them along in their career? You also need to have institutional commitment. So for us, it was letters from the dean, a letter from our CTSA program, commitments from those entities to support the postdoctoral scholars. And again, your institution should be keen to get these. There's prestige for the institution as well. I actually put example courses. This is how specific it gets. I said, if someone did this Master's of Science in Clinical Research, these are the specific courses that they might take so that reviewers could evaluate, is this the right kind of training they envisioned. There's separate sections on responsible conduct of research. So there's a page and a half or so about all the experiences we're going to have on responsible conduct of research. And this has to be more than that they're going to do the online compliance modules or something that is required of all the researchers on campus. It needs to be, something that the fellowship is giving value-added training. There is specific requests for instruction in methods for enhancing reproducibility. I spend my time in clinical trials, and there's a lot of things that we do in clinical trials that I think are great things for fellows to learn about, even if they don't do a clinical trial. Understanding about auditing data, all of the monitoring, all of the so forth that goes into ensuring research reproducibility is part of our formal experience. I made a conceptual diagram for our application where we talked about those things. And you can see that the research for the research fellowship is just one box among several boxes where we're hoping that the fellow gets professional development, mentoring, grant writing experience, didactic training, and that all these things come together to hit the milestones for the Institute. You need an evaluation plan. I had to learn a lot about this when we were applying. It's not just, did the fellows finish and did they move on, but something more detailed. Are your mentors getting evaluated? Is somebody that you put on your grant actually a terrible mentor and they never respond to your fellow when your fellow needs help in their special expertise area? Are you evaluating that person, and do you have a plan to rotate people off and replace them with other people if the evaluations are not good? Trainee evaluation can be their whole career trajectory, not just the number of publications, but what is their follow-on funding, and do they get academic appointments? What is their success? Some applications I have learned seek external feedback, so they will have an external advisory board. It was not required for ours, and it's one of those things that it is useful, though, if you have maybe a T32 program director outside of your group, but from a T32 or another training program on campus, who can look at how things are going and give you constructive feedback. Write that down as part of your evaluation plan and how you're going to continue to improve the process as you go forward. And an intangible thing that people look for as they read your application is, are you going to create a sense of community? So if a scholar comes and participates in your T program, are they going to feel like they participated in a program? Or are they just going to feel like they took some money and they got their master's degree? The latter is not ideal. The former is what they're after. So, do all of these pieces fit together and they feel like they were actually part of a structured program that gave them active career development? I mentioned the pre-doctoral scholars for our program. Again, it's not a required component, but for me, it was really important because I was very vested in looking earlier and earlier in people's career and trying to stimulate them to do an investigative career. And, ideally, I would start in high school and have people think, I always wanted to be an emergency care researcher. That's what I've wanted to do since 12th grade. We use our pre-doctoral slots to get medical students, typically between their first and second year, to do a summer program. It's customary at University of Pittsburgh, and then we have outreach to some other universities, and we get people to come for the summer. We try to have them interact with our postdocs, and we have some undergraduates who come for that summer program. And so the whole thing together, nobody's checking out each other's paychecks to see who's paid by the T32 and who's paid by the dean's office or anything, but the experience is, there were a lot of researchers at different career stages interacting with each other all summer long. The older kids teach the younger kids, and it's often great to have near peer mentoring where, the undergraduate can ask the medical student what it's like to get into medical school. The medical student can be asking the research fellow, how did residency go? What do I need to be thinking about if I'm going to do this, and so forth. So, creating that community, write it down how that's going to work for you. In terms of recruitment and running it, it's laid out as slots. You have a certain number of slots that you can pay for each year. We have 3 postdoctoral scholars. So we try to stagger it. We try to recruit 1 in a year and then 2 in another year and so forth, so that we have 3 at any given time, but they don't all finish at the same time, because recruiting 3 in 1 year would be 3 times as hard as recruiting 1 and so forth. So, think that through. And those edge years are really awkward. My funding will run out in 2027. Do I recruit somebody in 2027 before I know if I'm renewed? That means I need to be committing, to the person, uncertain of whether I have this money or not. Do I recruit 2 people? Those are strategic decisions you should think about, and if you're not the chair, think through with your chair. You appoint people in X-Train. If you haven't used X-Train, it's where training grant appointees put up their profile. For me, getting people shortly after residency, they frequently don't have a Commons username and we have to get them registered and so forth. X-Train creates some tasks in terms of signing off that the person is registered, signing off on their payback commitments and so forth. So there's some administrative noise that as a program director, you're gonna get from this that you just need to learn. It's not complex, but it's easy to fill the forms out incorrectly. And really important, here's the money part. No money comes to your institution unless you have a scholar appointed there. So even if my grant has 3 slots, if I only have one person appointed in X-Train, only one scholar's worth of money is going to flow to the University of Pittsburgh until I have the other 2 scholars appointed in X-Train. We use milestones that are achievable, that we try to see if scholars are on track. When we take a new scholar, I give them this table and say, you know, here's what we're expecting in year 1. Here's what we're expecting in years 2 and 3. And we run a checklist every time we meet to say, hey, have you done this? Have you done that? And, what do you think of your progress? Now, every investigator is different. So, coming up with milestones that are generic enough that it fits many scholars and are still useful is part of your writing. Tracking whether scholars are making progress is pretty much building their CV. It involves some other things like career development activities that may be buried in the CV. But now I've tried to structure this so that as every person's going along, we're collecting data in a similar format. And then I'm going to be interested in their progress as they leave. And where are those scholars now, 5 years after their T32? And apparently, if we keep renewing this, we're going to be interested in them probably for their entire career. Renewing it, I had to document the success of the scholars we trained. I had to document that I was getting enough applicants and it was still a worthwhile investment for NIH to put money there for us to train people. And then I had, in particular, and the reviewers were very keen on this, what have we done to improve it since we originally applied? So there is a clear expectation that you get a T32 started and that as you run it, it continues to improve and improve over time. And that's where all that feedback comes in. So that is what I wanted to share. So I think we'll have some time for questions. It's an important building block in the whole career trajectory of investigators. It's an investigator training grant. It's not a research grant. I feel that the effort in administering it and applying for it is for benefit of the fellows. It's actually a lot of work, and I had to pick the right time in my career when I could devote that much work with no % effort charged to this grant for it to be a good idea. So let me see if that is the end. Yep, there we go. And then we can stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Cliff, that was terrific.
If folks want to fill the chat or unmute. See a question about physician fellow level and traditional PhD postdoctoral scholars. Yes, in fact, really important, can't say it enough. This is to train investigators. So you could have, as a postdoctoral, you could be postdoctorate in nursing or postdoctorate in pharmacy. It does not say anywhere that you have to be a particular clinical specialty or an MD to have research training. And Jeremy, I think you mentioned, these things grew out of PhD training in their early days.
Yeah. And also, just to follow up on that, Cliff, I think you may have mentioned it, but it's worth pointing out again that your T32 in, let's say, emergency psychiatry is not in any way limited to physicians who are interested in this. It could be taking a board certified psychiatrist into your T32. It could be taking I don't know if this is true, but Clifton, an epidemiologist who wants to get training in the epidemiology of emergency psychiatry. So although this is sort of EM focused, you should think of the opportunities to include other specialists in your program, just as, and Cliff mentioned this, other programs could hopefully invite applications from an emergency physician to join their program, even though it was perhaps not targeted in that way.
Yeah. Our critical care department has a T32, and we frequently have sharing of applicants and directing people to each other's programs, because it's very overlapping, or the pool of people is overlapping. The focuses of the programs of our two T32s are quite different. Yeah, EM fellows get paid a certain amount. So what I showed you that table. Those are the dollars that NIH will send to your institution for support of your fellow or your postdoctoral scholar. You're welcome to put more money in the pot. And in my shop, their clinical income and what they get paid through being a clinician is a totally separate paycheck from a separate entity. It's moonlighting as far as the university is concerned. So it's possible to plus up the salary if that's what your local market affords, but that's your responsibility to come up with that. My university has guidelines. If I appoint someone as a postdoctoral scholar, I'm less able to give them any salary I want. I have to follow certain guidelines, but they're more flexible than that NIH pay table. How to develop milestones? Yeah, good question. I'm not sure that our milestones are optimized or that they fit everyone. Happy to share them. It's things that I thought were achievable, and based on my experience with prior research fellows, that I saw people could achieve. They are nice because they hold the scholar accountable, but they also hold me accountable. I said this person was supposed to do some number of presentations. Did I actually give them opportunity to present XYZ at some meeting? And because those milestones are on my office door, it reminds me all the time to make sure that the scholars are doing that. I would think of them as a preliminary piece of what you would hope the T32 scholar is going to put into their K grant. So if you have experience helping people or your own application for the next stage in career development grant, K grants, that it wants to see your research background, it wants to see your previous publications, it wants to see your motivation for research. And so your milestones should be developing documentation of that for the person who's at entry level, but not within the 2 years wants to be applying for a K award. Yeah, Jeremy, I think there's a question about multiple institutes collaborating.
I am not an expert in T32s because these grants, like all of the NIH training grants, K awards, K23s, K12s, are handled by the division within the institute that manages training. So I'm not an expert. I suspect it would be extraordinarily difficult to set up a jointly sponsored T32. I would not go down this path if you can possibly avoid it. Now, is it unfair? In a way, it is, yes, because we're not so specialized, and there's lots of things that we're interested in. But I think if you can get training in one specific niche, you can surely apply that to others. So you will not be able to easily get a jointly funded T32.
Yeah, one strategy to do that might be, if the person's got the right credentials, maybe they could apply for an individual NRSA, rotate off of your T32, get support from NIA or NIAMS or another institute while you take on another scholar. So if they can score an individual NRSA in their second year, it would free up. So de facto, you would be taking support for your scholars from 2 institutes.
So just to emphasize again, if you are thinking of applying for a T32, and I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to train the next up and coming leaders in the field. If you are thinking of it, you should look at the general announcement, the parent announcement, and then click on any links that will take you into the institution that you're interested in. And then you really want to do some homework on the website that I showed you. I think Cliff also showed it. It's Reporter, NIH Reporter. So that is a publicly available website of all funded grants from the NIH. So if you had decided that you would like to do something with the National Institute on Aging, you would then really dive into that T32 look at Reporter, find the T32s that have been awarded. That'll give you a sense of what they're interested in. Now, that's because there are so few emergency medicine faculty applying for these, it's almost a certainty that the institute to which you apply, other than heart, lung, and blood, I think, will have no experience with an emergency physician doing this. But that's actually a good opportunity. That means you're different from the pack. And then the next thing to do is to really, once you've gotten all this background information, really have a good, talk with the T32 project officer with all kinds of questions that you may have. And their job is to be very helpful and to bring you to the level where you can actually apply for the T32 itself. All right. Should we do a last call for questions? You can put your hands up, you can type in the chat, and if not, I take it as a sign that we've been so thorough in our presentation that we've covered all the bases.
I agree. Let's feel free to reach out to us personally if folks have anything. I'm told that this has been recorded and that SAM will share the link sometime in the future for the recording if you missed it. And I'll double check my slides that nothing is, I think I have pictures of students. I might take the picture of our students off, but I'm happy to share those with anyone who wants. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully we can get
thank you.
investigators trained.
Cliff, thank you. And thanks to our team from SAM. Cheerio.